Hey everyone, how you doing today? It's Monday once more, and I am here talking about author stuff. Yay. I seem to be catching on and actually doing all of my videos on time, finally. Yay! um, so, this morning I wanted to talk about research because research is a huge thing for some types of books. And there's usually a little bit of research no matter what kind of book you're doing. Even a high fantasy, you're gonna, look up elf names or check to see whether Tolkien's already written your plot, that kind of thing. Um, I'm reading or writing, not reading, a science fiction novel right now, and so there's a ton of science, and it's well beyond my personal comfort zone. And so this has meant there's been an awful lot of research going on and me having to stretch my comfort zone a little bit so that I can learn enough to do a good job of writing this stuff. And it's been interesting and maybe a little bit scary almost, but not bad. But there's a lot of research to do. So I'm going to talk about science fiction because it's what I'm doing. Um, but obviously, you would apply this to whatever it is that you yourself are doing. um, so most of my research is to do with the science of things. So I could have done a fantasy approach to my spacecraft and just made it whatever size it was and called it a day. But I don't like doing that. Science fiction was something that I grew up on, and I grew up with hard science fiction. So Asimov and Heinlein and Niven, and these were masters at their craft. And to do a lesser job really sits badly with me. So I have made it very high priority for myself to make sure that I do a good job of rendering the science understandable by everyone who is in the storyline, and so that no matter who my reader is, they'll be able to do it. I happen to have a non-sciency type character in there so that I can use her to explain some of the more complex things too, so that even readers who are more like me, who don't necessarily get the science, can understand what's going on. And at the same time, I don't want to put so much of the science in and the numbers that it gets boring. So it's a real fine line to walk. So I'm going to use my spaceship as an example. So I could have just, made my spaceship and said, oh, the magic of the 21st century has made it work. But I did not want to do that for a variety of reasons. And so I started researching, well, how big of a ship do I need? Well, I mean, the size doesn't really matter as much in space as it does on Earth because weight isn't an issue, but mass is still an issue. And thrust works versus mass, not weight. So, I had to look at that and how much fuel was I going to need and what kind of fuel was I going to use. And so I looked at the NASA website. I looked at some YouTube videos. Oh, excuse me. There I am again. It must be Monday. And some recent news articles that had come out about a nuclear drive that runs on water. It makes steam, and the steam propulses the ship. So this is all actual existent science. So we could do it right now, or we're in the process of doing it right now. And that's a great thing because that's a good place to start. I want to take the science just a step farther so that my characters are living in the future, not in the present. So that means looking at, Am I going to have a faster than light drive? Well, no, actually, I'm not. So it's going to take a month for my characters to get from Earth to the place where they're going, which is basically the same distance as Mars. Why a month? Because currently it takes 4 years, but there's a reason for that. um, we could right now, if we really wanted to, get to Mars in 7 months if we had everything set up exactly right. And that's with current technology and current limits on our fuel design. And our fuel design, sorry to say, is shit. We don't have a good way to power our spaceships right now. When we switch over to nuclear power in our spaceships, we take things from very slow to very fast, and it becomes much easier to carry the fuel and a bunch of other things. So I looked at it and decided that this was not unreasonable, and then I talked to a sciencey, nerdy kind of person and went over the numbers, and he thought it was spot on. So we're good there. Oh, there is not enough coffee in the world this morning. Wow. Um, then I'm looking at, okay, does my ship have artificial gravity? Because it's something we're working towards, but right now artificial gravity is still completely a science fiction fantasy thing. Okay? We have no science that tells us how to make gravity. What we can do and have the technology to do is create centripetal force, which is a variant of thrust, which is what you get when you spin things. And so like in 2021 or 2001, when they're in the space shuttle, they get the spinny bit. Okay. So it turns out that you don't really need to spin those all that fast to get an approximation of gravity. The thing that's holding back is first the mass, because you still have to shove this mass through space, even though you're not shoving weight through space. And the second thing is that that spinny part has to be large enough that the difference between the force felt by your feet and the force felt by your head are not so different that it causes an issue. So there's a size thing. It has to be this, big in order to function correctly and not have either a problem with the spaceship, a problem with the people in the spaceship, or a problem with um, the perceived gravity that is being felt by the people within. And it's this is stuff that is brand new to me. I mean, I've kind of mentally masturbated and thought about it in the past, but not spent an extended amount of time actually investigating this. And so I was fascinated to find out that the spin on uh, to make a centrifugal for sorry, not centrifugal, centripetal. I have hard time with that. Centripetal force is the force you get when you spin something and you are walking on the outside. Um, it's actually relatively slow. So to get 1/6 gravity, the track, the hamster wheel that's spinning around my spaceship is about a quarter of a mile in length around. Um, and that's just rough, guys. Okay. I mean, I have the actual numbers, but you don't need that. So it's about a quarter mile, and it has to rotate 4 times an hour, I think was the actual. I mean, it's really slow. I was surprised at how slow it was going. Um, it might be 4 times a minute. I think it is 4 times a minute. Sorry. I actually have to look at my notes to figure it all out. But I mean, really, and all said and done, that's really slow. Um, think about if you've ever, if you're a child of the 70s and 80s like me, you probably had those clacker things. They're like two balls on a string, and you would whip them around and try and clack them. And most of the time, you hit your friends and you got in trouble. And I'm sorry. Uh, squirrel. When you're spinning a ball on a rope, you're creating centripetal force on the ball. So if you had somebody inside the ball, they could walk. And it's really quite slow speed, even at when you're dealing with just that tiny little space. When you get bigger, it goes even slower. So yeah, I was surprised. I had expected it to take a lot more thrust and a lot more spin to create a gravity well, or to create the sensation of gravity good enough for our people, and it really wasn't. So that was really fascinating, and it took me a long time to really understand it. But yeah, um, so fun things like when you spin a section on a spaceship that way, you're going in one direction. And you can't change that direction once you've got the spin going. In order to change direction, you have to shut the spin down. Now, you want to know why? I don't know how many of you have played with a gyroscope, but if you put a gyroscope, you put a spin on it, and you try and push it, it doesn't want to go anywhere. That's the same basic idea. You've turned the spaceship into a giant gyroscope. It can't turn left. You have to shut the gyroscope off in order to make your turn, or to make course corrections, or any. So all this stuff I had to go and find out. So some of it I found out on the NASA website, which I have to say, from a science fiction perspective, is phenomenal. They have so many articles, and they have people doing videos for kids, which is about the level that I need the explanations at. Wikipedia has a fairly decent set of information on this. Wikipedia is not a place that I go to for the be all and end all of my research, but I often will start there, because if a subject has a lot of external links at the bottom, I can go there and see where they got their information. And that often leads me to some really fascinating stuff. In this case, I only needed kind of the basics. So I went with my Wikipedia article on space travel and orbiting mechanics. Sorry. But I also went to SpaceX. SpaceX has a website up, and they have some information. And you can look at a whole bunch of different commercial and publicly owned and federally owned organizations that have to do with space, and learn about the science behind it. And once you understand the basics of that science, it's not as difficult to look at it and go, okay, I'm only doing this story 50 years in the future. So having artificial gravity, that's just not going to fly. We don't have the time to finish the math on that. So I won't bother with that. I'll use centripetal force instead. This kind of research is really important to take it, look at it from a fantasy perspective. I decided that my fantasy races were going to be a little different. And one of the things in my fantasy novel is that my elves are obligatory vegans. They're obligatory herbivores. They can't eat animal products. It makes them sick. So they are like cows or goats. Well, okay, maybe goats is a bad idea because they eat everything. But okay, so you use cows. They're like cows. They can eat roughage and live off of roughage that would kill a human because we couldn't digest it and there's not enough food. On the other hand, meat's going to cause them a lot of issues, and they needed a secondary stomach to process the roughage, just like a cow. So yeah, I had to go and learn a bit about physiology and how food is processed in a body and what that would do. What's the difference in their internal organs, and why, you ask, is that important? Well, when you shoot an elf in the stomach, what happens? So in order to know how to fix the problem that I had created by shooting my elf, I had to discover how my elf was put together. All of these research things are ridiculously important, even if they never get mentioned in your book, because they give you a reality to work from. So it makes your world real. When you write about something that is real to you, that reflects in the written word. And so you end up with a finished product that people get into and they fall into that story. And it starts the little movie going in their brains so that they can see through your words what's happening. When you are struggling with something or making it up as you go along, sometimes you lose that. And that can be problematic. There are a couple of places in some of the Taylor Mage novels that I didn't have enough of the details figured out, and I wasn't as happy with the finished product as I could have been. And so, that's something that I have to work on. Why do vampires react to sunlight, but don't react to moonlight, which is reflected sunlight? I don't know. I have to know why these things happen in order to write comfortably about them. And so that's why research is so important. Even if you're not doing something that is science-based or fact-based, having that those facts on hand really allows you to bring it to life. Historical fiction. Nothing beats historical fiction. You have to understand the history that you're writing about. If you're writing historical fiction about the Middle Ages and you have your character come out with a gun, well, that's no. And that one is fairly jarring. But what if instead you had the cook making up a potato dish? Some people might get it and others might not. But for the people who understand that potatoes weren't eaten in the Middle Ages, that's really just as jarring as the gun example. And so those are things that you have to know. You have to go and investigate and research and write this stuff down. I have a notebook that is full of jotted notes about random facts about nuclear generators and how hydrogen and oxygen combine and make water, and how those things are split apart to make fuel, and notes on how large the hamster wheel has to be in order to make it spin at the right speed so that nothing breaks, and how do I go about making that left turn at Albuquerque for my spaceship. And most of this stuff will never be seen by my readers. It doesn't show up. I don't write about it in the book. But what does happen is that they see that history is real and it exists because I went to the trouble of researching it beforehand. So it was real when I wrote it. So that's why research is so important. And I hope that you guys take the time to do that research. It's worth sacrificing a day or two of writing time to sit and get the facts before you move forward. So just before I sign off for the night, I wanted to let you guys know I will be appearing for a Zoom presentation at the Smythe Library on Wednesday, March 17th at 6:30 p.m. Just so as you all know, that is indeed Leprechaun Day, and I will be wearing green, so no pinching. We'll be talking about the history of the Middle Ages and the food, and talk about creating a fire, what cooking vessels are used, and how to cook some of my medieval recipes at home. I will be sharing a chicken recipe with everybody that you can try on your own at home, and I hope you will join us. If you go to Allyson Sabo on Facebook, you will find that the Zoom meeting information is there. And yeah, everything's all ready to go. So that's that. I hope you guys have a good week. Remember to get some exercise, hydrate, eat good food, and don't eat too much junk. I love you all and have a great week. I'll see you next week, okay?